Alright, so 6 countersunk screws. Just do these screws up lightly until they're all in place, then tighten them up. That's our 6 in place. Just nip those screws up tight. Notice the head on that screw is a bit damaged. Still does the job. And check that that still moves smoothly. It does. So our focus scale ring. Now of course we've got alignment marks here, so I can see exactly where that fits to the outer helical. So I'll pop the 4 countersunk screws in here to hold this. I'll leave those quite loose at the moment until they're all in position. Now check the alignment, make sure my alignment marks are looking good. That looks good. Nip those screws up very lightly. If you do these screws up tight, you'll effectively just distort the outer helical, and then the focus won't run smooth. They don't need to be very tight, they just need to be nipped up and no more. Here we have the coupling arm for the rangefinder. And this is held to the front standard with 2 small countersunk screws. Get one started. Get the other one started. Put those screws up tight. These 2 screws were loose when I took the camera apart, but that wouldn't have affected things because it's effectively clamped in place by the shutter when the shutter is fixed firmly with the retaining ring at the back. And here's the pin for the top that goes on that arm. This is this pin moves the arm on the rangefinder so that the rangefinder follows the action of the focus scale ring. Let's put a little bit of synthetic grease in that track. That should be plenty. As the front of the camera is collapsed, you'll see that that arm slides away down that track. So the arm is swung away to the left, to my left there. Otherwise, if it just stuck straight out the back, there'd be no way of collapsing the front of the camera. So that's that part. And just about put the front door on there now, though I've got one spacer washer here which came off the film advance. No, the shutter release. I need to make sure that goes in and is not lost. They're easier to get in at this stage than later. I've also got one extra screw washer here, but I don't really have a home for that. And it may be somebody had put that in there as an extra spacer on the shutter release, or it may be that it was one of the original parts from the camera that had been misplaced during previous reassembly, and so a new one had been fitted. The easiest place to lose that is at the top here. It's one of the spaces that goes between the struts and the body. Particularly at the top, it's very hard to see where it's got to. It's quite likely someone's installed a second one there, got it into position, ignored the fact that the first one's loose, sitting in there doing not an awful lot, and it waited for someone like me to come along and discover there were odd things going on. So this shutter release, well, I'll put that spacer on the arm here because I'm pretty confident that that's where it belongs. And the shutter release itself here, the shaft, I'll just give it a wipe with molybdenum paste on the inside, and then in the body, holes there and there, and the front piece of this lever which rubs up against it. This spring has to be brought round and tucked in under here, and it catches on a rivet right at that point. It's a bit awkward to get done, but you can certainly achieve it. I sort of poke it in with the tip of a screwdriver. Of course, it never wants to go in a straight line, it wants to hide down underneath and things. If I can get it behind that lever, yeah, that's in position now. And drop my shutter release shaft in here. Get that sitting in position like that, and just run a touch of molybdenum paste on there where it runs on the guide post, and there's our shutter release there. That looks pretty good. If I put the film advance knob on there, I can probably rotate the film advance, roll the sprocket shaft with my thumb, and you can see how that activates the mechanism and allows me to press the shutter down. That's looking very good and running nice and smooth. This little cam surface here, I'll just put a bit of molybdenum paste on there. It's got a little notch in it there, and as that notch comes round, it catches the tail of this arm and pulls it forward, or pulls it back, which frees up the shutter release. That's moving very well. That's good. I think putting the door on the front is probably the next thing to do. I'll apply a little bit of grease to the pins here. And put their fibre washers in place. These washers just provide a bit of controlled friction, if you like, on the arms, stop them floating about. They're just cartridge paper. Just checking these arms aren't bent too much out of shape. That appears to be okay. Pull those into position so I'll get the bottom one in the slot, then stretch the door up and over and onto the top one. That looks good. And of course there's a hinge pin top and bottom. Typically the hinge pin at the top is cleaner than the one at the bottom, because the one at the bottom has usually got glue and leather residue on it. See if I can get that hole lined up. That's that one. And at the bottom of the door, the same deal. Bit of glue there. And check that the front opens and closes. Bit stiff perhaps, I'll give those arms a bit of a tweak. Alright, so I need to put some grease in here and grease in these slots and work that mechanism a few times. Well, it certainly closes smoothly. It pops open enough for you to get your thumb in there and open the front, which is all that matters. They never popped right open. They weren't self-erecting like the front of some bellows cameras. They just pop enough for you to get your thumb in there and lift it open. That appears to be very good. So at that stage, the body lacks its rangefinder, which I haven't serviced yet, and it lacks the shutter, which I haven't serviced yet. But the film advance mechanism is all in place and should go well. So I think the shutter next. Alright, just remove that retaining ring. The rear lens group just unscrews from the shutter body. A bit dusty on the back, nothing extraordinarily strange about that. There's our big stack of washers, spacers, shims, and the front group should just screw in too. It does. That could certainly do with a good clean, but it's nothing remarkable there. That looks quite good. So what can I see here? Well, there's a lot of corrosion products on the front here. So definitely that's been, I would have said it had been splashed with something, looking at the pattern of that. Got to rotate that lock. I need the right screwdriver. Should be able to lift that front cover off. Oh, it's just not quite sitting square. Oh, that's very reluctant. There we have it. So yeah, that could do with a good clean into the shutter itself. Take off the shutter release arm, unhook the main spring here. I should be able to lift out this cocking ring. If I unhook this spring, I should be able to get this arm out. That's the return spring for the shutter release. This is our high speed spring, 500th of a second speed spring. This little latch holds the shutter in the cocked position. We'll just remove it, single screw, remove that latch. It's got a spring on it. The spring that does double duty, it tensions that, and it also holds down, this is the B lever, and it pushes that across, and that we can have off. That looks very subtly bent there, but I'm not going to do anything about that. It may be bent for a very good reason. I'm just going to take this pointer off the aperture scale settings, the setting scale here, because it sticks out a long way and it'll make it awkward to get the mechanism plate in and out of the shutter. If I leave it there, that's better. The aperture lever, well, that moves smoothly enough. There's obviously some oil on those blades, but they're not particularly bad. The shutter blades look oily too. I don't know how bad they are. Yeah, you can certainly see the oil on those blades, and you can see the blades don't want to return to the rest position. They're very reluctant. So it'll be the blades and probably the blade actuating ring causing that. So 3 screws hold our shutter case together from the back. They screw from the case through to the back of the mechanism plate, so they hold the mechanism plate into the case. So there's our shutter split in half, with the shutter case as the aperture, the diaphragm mechanism for the aperture is there, and our mechanism plate here has the shutter blades on it and the blade actuating ring and everything else. Those blades will certainly need to be cleaned. I'll clean them first with naphtha. If they show any problems like surface corrosion or roughness, I'll polish them with some brasso. Now here, this blade actuating ring is exceptionally sluggish, and I would say that that's the cause of the shutter not running well at all. That'll all need to come down and be cleaned. So first I'll start by unhooking that return spring. This little arm swings the blade actuating ring backwards and forwards. The blade actuating ring, of course, swings the blades in or out. Just take that arm off and check the feel of that ring. Yeah, it's not smooth. It's quite stiff. We've got 3 screws in this shutter that hold the retainer ring in place. This is a short screw in this position, and the other two are longer, I think. Yep. Take that retainer plate off. Just looking at the state of this, there's some dirt or something here. The blade actuating ring just looks dirty. There's nothing really to see on the mechanism plate. I'll check the state of the retard gear train here. If I pull back the pallets at this end, it should run down. It does, but it's pretty sluggish. Oh, that's very sluggish. So that all needs to be flushed out with some naphtha, and I usually do that on the mechanism plate. I don't separate the speed train from the mechanism plate without very good reason, because it's a bugger getting the speeds adjusted correctly again, and the speeds are adjusted by adjusting the position of the speed train on the mechanism plate, swinging it in and out at this end or in and out at this end, and you can spend a lot of time trying to get that right. But if it was right before when the shutter was last serviced, once it's clean, chances are it'll be right again. You shouldn't need to muck with those settings. I'm going to start assembling the diaphragm now. So I start by putting the plate on my jig, and the plate, there's two sides to this. One side has 5 dimples in it where the shutter blades go, and that dimpled side goes down. It's absolutely plain this side. Here's the case. Now the case, I've put the control back in here. This ring here controls the diaphragm blades and swings them in and out. I put this back together. On this particular shutter, this has to be fitted to the case and then fitted to the blades and diaphragm. On later shutters there were cutouts in the plate here to allow you to get to these screws from the other side. That's not the case with this shutter. So I've got to put the blades in position. The blades only go in one orientation, and they are simply placed in one on top of the other. The pivots closest to the centre line of the blade go to the plate. The pivots closest to the edge of the blade should be up at this stage. I have to get all of these blades sitting in their little sockets, and I have to be careful not to put any of the blades in the wrong way round, otherwise you'll end up with an egg-shaped opening instead of a nice circle. The blades lay on top of each other until you get round to the start here, and I've got to pull back the first blades to expose the hole for this blade, and so forth. So each blade is over the top of the next blade at one end and underneath the next blade at the other end. So effectively there is no first blade. All the blades are the same. Shutter blades are different. Shutter blades lay on top of each other. Of course, this is awkward to get this done without disturbing the earlier blades and pulling them out of position. One last blade to go. Now I have to lift those blades back over the top without disturbing anything. Right, so I've got my blades all positioned there. I think I've managed to do that without disturbing any of the positions of those blades. And now I've got to lower the case over the top. And these pivots sticking up have to drop into these slots here. So I've got to make sure I've got this the right way round. That my fixing screws, there's 3 holes in the plate here, here and here around the edge. You could ignore that one there, that doesn't got nothing to do with it. And they fit in here, here and here on the case. Screws come up from the other side. So I've got to make sure I've got everything lined up correctly. I've got to get this on those pivots. So I can feel them start, I'm giving a bit of a wriggle, I can feel them click into place. So I think that's correct. I can flip my jig over now, swing that piece in underneath, make sure I've got that plate aligned. And there are 3 screws which hold that plate into the case. So I want to get the screws started. Just run them down very gently. Don't tighten the blades hard up at this stage, because if you've managed to displace one of the blades, you could damage something if you tighten the screws up and trap a blade, or a pivot on the blade gets trapped under the plate instead of in the mounting hole. That looks okay. Now I'm just checking this plate to make sure that I've got a pivot in each of those sockets, and I have. That looks good. I'll move the blade actuating ring and see if the diaphragm opens and closes smoothly, and it does. So I can tighten my 3 screws up. And that's the diaphragm reassembled in the case. That's running nice and smoothly now. And most importantly, I'm confident there's no oil on the blades, no contamination on the blades, so the blades won't be damaged. Oil tends to stick the blades together, so as you turn this ring, you're pulling the blades apart, and if they don't want to come apart because they're glued together with oil, you'll damage something, and that's exactly what does happen with oily diaphragm blades. That's good. So that case is ready to be mated back up with the mechanism plate when we get to that point.